for the drums.
Hey guys.
Hey, Keith.
Hey, Keith.
Hey, so I'm back again to continue the series of mental models. And this time, number 5, what I want to do is kind of lay out what is this thing that's happening inside of the Tableau system when we talk about measures and aggregation. And so this particular series, this mental model series, in case you're just stumbling on the video ad hoc today, is actually a sequence. There's a series. And so what we're doing today is we're building further upon the first 4 mental models, and you can go back and watch those and then follow along on the journey as we go. Now, thanks to our mental model number 4, which we covered last time,
Mm-hmm.
we know very securely what is a dimension. What do we mean by this word dimension, specifically inside of Tableau? Like what's happening inside of Tableau when we treat a given pill or a column of data as a dimension? What it means is that as a dimension, we're going to get one new record for each unique intersection of dimension members on the canvas. And each of those new records are going to be created as an aggregate result set inside of the query results. And so this is just sort of part and partial to the way Tableau functions. You can treat any pill as a dimension, or you can treat any pill as a measure, and it's going to behave differently based on what you do. And so
Mm-hmm.
now we know that when I treat something as a dimension, these aggregated query results here are going to give me one new record for each unique combination of the available dimension members. And so from there, in this mental model, number 5, what I'd like to do is continue our journey and continue to build further and build up and scaffold our knowledge so that we can get a full holistic understanding of just how to think in Tableau and really dig with the two of you, which I'm thrilled to have you here as input and conversation and feedback around this topic.
Yeah.
What do we mean aggregation? Like what's going on in there when we say aggregated result set? I think kind of the premise of these mental models is to pick apart just key building blocks of the way that we work in Tableau, like what is data, what is a
Mm-hmm.
dimension. Today, what is aggregation?
What I like about this question, Keith, is that these are those fundamental concepts. You call them building blocks. To me, the core definition of these terms is the raw material that we store in our brains as we're thinking about what to click on,
Right.
right? Um, and so these fundamental concepts give a really, really solid foundation so that as we're trying to solve problems along the way, we've got this raw material. What does this word and this menu even mean?
What is this thing? And I love that you guys are each doing your own series on the podcast about things that could be considered perhaps far more complicated than this. Jonathan's doing grand totals. Robert is doing everyday design practices and the everyday design of KPIs and data modeling around those KPIs. And I love that we're going to loop those more complex topics, which really everybody's interested in. How do I do the hard stuff? Back to these fundamental building blocks, because at the end of the day, if you don't have the foundation of the house correct, then you could wind up with slanted walls. So what is this thing, aggregation? What do we mean when we say this word aggregation? And I'm going to give you my kind of premise on this, and I'm curious to get your feedback and input as we go. To me, in Tableau, when we do this thing called aggregation, we're really actuating the process of dimension reduction. So we're removing dimensions from the original data set that we were working with. And that could be the query results itself if we're further aggregating with table calculations, or it could be removing dimensions from the original data source that we're connecting to. And by removing dimensions, we're taking what used to be many values and we're just summarizing those down to a single summary statistic. And this is really the physical process of data
Hmm.
aggregation, is taking what was previously many values and then summarizing them into a single summary value that represents all of those underlying individual observations. And so to kind of give an illustration of what we mean by this, I'm going to pull up here this sort of hypothetical data set that I've been working with Jonathan, and I've even further simplified it. Um, let's just say that we've got this original data set, which, as we talked about in an earlier mental model, the first question to ask of any new data set ever is, what's the grain of the data that I'm connecting to? In this original data set, let us opine that the original data has the granularity of um, country and year, and we've got an observation of the number of cases for that country and year in this original data set. And if we wanted to aggregate that to get just the sum of cases by country, then the physical process that occurs is we would drag the pills out onto the canvas, keeping the country dimension, and we would request the sum of cases. And mechanically, physically, what's occurring inside of Tableau when we do that is this aggregate set of query results is taking what was a deeper level of granularity and it's removing the dimension year, and thereby it's reducing the number of records, and it's taking what was many cases in the original data set and then creating this new aggregated query result that has one value, in this case the number 6 for the country Afghanistan, that is a single summary value, an aggregate value that's representative of many values that existed in the previous more granular data set that we were connecting to.
I really love this diagram because it really gets this piece across with aggregation, which I think is critical, is that we're starting with that original data set on the right. And then we're working with a new data set on the left, that aggregate data set, which has
Hmm.
fewer columns, fewer rows. It is something different.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a completely new thing, and you, like you
Mm-hmm.
say, it's fewer columns and fewer rows. So physically,
Mm-hmm.
what's happening is we're removing, in this example, simple example, the year dimension, and by doing that, we're reducing the granularity of this aggregate result set by eliminating that column. If the underlying
Mm-hmm.
data is tidy, which we have a whole mental model on tidy data, then we're reducing the number of records in that original data set, and we're really summarizing this thing down from what was previously a 3 by 6 table, now down to a 2 by 3 table.
Hmm.
And it's easy to see the reason why people are so interested and sort of tempted to aggregate data, because it takes up a third less space in this case, right? And so working
Mm-hmm.
with aggregate data is often very tantalizing because it performs
Hmm.
better and it's smaller and it has less mass and it's easier to move around. But as we'll talk about a little bit later, once you've aggregated that data, the former detail that was previously available is just no longer accessible to you anymore.
Right. You said it. That's what I was going to observe here is that the advantage is the simplification. The disadvantage is the trash cans you just showed on the screen. We're losing something. We're getting rid of something that um, is an important piece of information and should still be accessible. So there's always the weight, and which it sounds like we'll discuss, of, is it all right to get rid of this, or is this actually very critical to keep in here?
Yeah. And choosing when and where and how to aggregate is kind of part and parcel to the caliber of our skill set as a sense maker, right?
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So just to recap, in Tableau, when we're talking dimensions and measures, dimensions are going to determine the level of detail. They're going to determine the granularity of the canvas that we're working on, the viz level of detail. And we'll come back to talk all about the viz level of detail in a future mental model. And then in Tableau, measures are going to aggregate or summarize to the level of detail of granularity that's determined by the dimensions that I've chosen in the view. And so when I treat a pill as a dimension, in that aggregate query result, set, I'm going to get one new record for every unique combination of the available dimension members. And the dimensions are up to my choosing. I can treat a pill on the canvas as a dimension if I want to, or as an aggregate value. And the measures in Tableau are going to do this aggregation thing. The measures are going to summarize up to the level of detail that's determined by the dimensions that are in the view. And what that means physically is that I'm going to take a lot of values that were in that underlying data set, and I'm going to collapse them down and remove the dimensionality of the stuff that isn't on the canvas, and take what used to be many values and summarize them into a single summary statistic that represents those underlying values at the level of detail of the canvas and the dimensions that are in the view.
Or you used a magic phrase, level of detail. It could be the level of detail in the canvas that we can see with our eyes. Or we could be aggregating based on a very specifically defined level of detail calculation that takes into account some of those dimensions that may not be visible, but need to be taken into account for these summaries.
Totally. And then I can take the aggregate result set and further aggregate those with table calculations. And Jonathan's going to continue to show us all about how the grand totals can exist at a differing level of detail. And in fact, when I was setting all
Yep.
this up in a previous mental model, I counted at least 8, maybe 9 or 10 differing levels of detail that can all coexist simultaneously when we're working in a single analysis in Tableau. So understanding this concept of granularity and aggregation is really fundamental to everything that we do. And like we've discussed, understanding when and where we're doing this aggregation thing in order to get the sequence and the timing right that's most apt for the analysis.
And this is one of the areas that I think where Tableau can actually be a little harder to use than some other tools, because we can have these different levels of detail at different times. And that this place of when our calculations aren't working right necessarily, doing that work to say, particularly because in a lot of cases it's visible from the pills on the canvas. What we're looking at. We're looking at this marks card and it's got state on it. And we're looking at this other marks card that has country on it and not state. They're different fields returning different numbers of dimension values. They're going to return different results. So for me, there's this piece of just paying attention to that in Tableau to help us identify, okay, what is this aggregation doing in this context?
In this context, on this marks card,
Yeah.
etc. Yeah,
Yep.
for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so bottom of the rabbit hole, we're just talking about what is aggregation, right? And as it turns out, there's a lot of different threads and shiny squirrels that you can follow. The main takeaway here, what is this aggregation thing? Aggregation is lost granularity. It's taking the grain of some original data set and summarizing it to some aggregate level of detail. And the way that I think about this is, you know, if I pass somebody in the hall at work in the morning and I say, "Hey, how you doing?" And they say, "I'm okay." What they really are doing is they're summarizing their internal emotional state, because in actual fact, there's this part of their life that's going really well. There's this other part that's not so great. They're super frustrated about this place they just came from, but we don't have the availability for them to give me all of that detail. So they aggregate their experience and they say, "I'm okay." But the result is that as the result of that aggregation, I just don't have any visibility whatsoever into the underlying detail that was used to surmise that aggregation or that summary. And so this is what I think about it. And and it's really important, like we talked about at the top of the episode, because there are so many different ways in Tableau that we can perform aggregation. And there's so many different places and locations that we can do aggregation. And so what that means is there's this wide menu, this wide array of possibilities that as the analyst we have, and being very selective and intentional about when and where and in which location and which type of aggregation that we're performing is really, part and parcel to the results of the analysis.
I really liked your smiley face emojis because it's a useful metaphor for the fact that when we do these greetings, that's kind of that initial step. That's our introduction, and maybe that's all we have time for at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
If we have a little bit more time, a little bit more interest, we want to find out more. Well, then we ask more questions, and that first aggregation isn't enough, right? So we have to recognize that with any aggregation, there's always something else to discover. And we should always think about what are those things and how do we make sure that when we're simplifying things, we don't forever lose those next step questions and further investigation.
That rich textured detail, right? I'm going to
Yeah.
want to drill the detail.
Mm-hmm.
And so to finish, what I'd really like to do then is really honor Joe Mako in this case. With each of these mental models, I'm doing my best to kind of conclude with a word of wisdom and to really give credit where credit's due to just the champions on whose shoulders the entire Tableau community is resting. And Joe was just this pioneering champion of the Tableau community. And on this topic of dimensions and measures, Joe was a significant mentor to myself and to so many people. I just remember so clearly the moment when he was explaining all of this stuff to me. And Joe says, Keith, when I look at data, all I see are dimensions and measures. And it's just thanks to Joe that he taught me to put the goggles on, right? Like when you sit down with an empty canvas in Tableau, the domain of the data could be anything. It could be serial numbers. It could be items in the checkout. It could be any type of data domain, clicks on a website. We need the ability to set that domain understanding aside for just a moment so that we can embrace the structural understanding of what's going on in Tableau and take on this engineering mindset so that we can arrange the pills on the canvas to get what we want. And Joe just taught me that the manner that is accomplished is you put your goggles on. And when you look at Tableau and when you look at data, all I see are dimensions and measures. Thank you, Joe. And so that then is our conclusion for today. We'll pick it back up with Mental Model 6 in the future. When I look at data, all I see are dimensions and measures. And then everything else is just a canvas awaiting insight and visualization.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you,
that was
Keith.
super fun.
This has been great.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep. Okay. We'll see you next time.
All right.
Bye.
Action Analytics.